Hello everybody, Mike Westphal here with McDonald Garden Center talking about veggie garden basics. So vegetable gardening is one of my favorite things to do every year and all year really, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. And really what I want to do today is kind of give you some of the basics about veggie gardening, some of the kind of quick, simple things that are very, very important to be successful in our vegetable gardens. Whether you're doing it in the fall or the spring or the summer, in containers, in raised beds, in the ground, wherever you might be doing it, foodscaping, there's 100 different options for you. And that's what's so fun about it. And so it's a lot of fun to get into vegetable gardening. And because you can do it in so many different locations, I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. But I will say this, there's nothing better than eating something that you've grown yourself. And it's such a rewarding experience. And I've always said that there's nothing better tasting than something that you've grown in your own garden. Usually when you eat that first tomato that you grew yourself, you say, oh, I'll never go back to the store-bought. Unfortunately, we don't have a year-round growing season here in the Hampton Roads area, so we can grow lots of tomatoes during our spring, summer, into fall time frame. But other than that, that's about the only time we get to do it. But the season goes on and on here, and so we'll talk a little bit about the cole crops and different things that you can do, but it's a lot of fun. And what I really love about vegetable gardening is it's great for people of all ages. So no matter what age you are, if you're a kid, it's a great thing to get kids into gardening by doing vegetable gardenings. Having them grow something that they can eat is rewarding, but also a lot of fun, and it really gets our young generation into gardening, and it's a great thing to get them started. But all the way up into our seniors, into our older age, we can garden in so many different locations. So you can do it in containers, so you can do it indoors. I mean, there's so many different places that you can grow now that it makes it very accessible to everybody. So no matter what age you are, that you can definitely do vegetable gardening, and it's a lot of fun, and it can be pretty simple. And that's kind of what I'm going to try to do today, is very much kind of simplify the basics of what you need to be successful in your vegetable garden. Few kind of starting points here that I always like to talk about, no matter what kind of project I'm doing in my yard or around my yard, is a little bit of planning. And so you can see over here, I just put that little drawing of a landscape plan. Not that we need anything that detailed for our vegetable garden, or that pretty for sure. But we definitely want to spend a little bit of time planning out what we're going to plant and what we're going to do, how big it's going to be, how many plants we're going to try and put in there. Plus, I really want you to come in and see us here at the garden center. And like I said, if you're not in our neck of the woods, go and see a local garden center and take some information when you go, because we're going to ask questions. We're going to ask lots of questions to make sure that we find out all the details. So if you've got your length and your width of your flower bed over your raised beds, or you're going to say, I'm going to grow in containers, is it plastic or ceramic or clay? We'll talk about all those basics here now so that you get a little bit of insight, but I definitely want you to come in and see us here at the garden center or your local garden center to really ask more questions and to kind of get more specific on some of those things. But a little bit of a plan really goes a long way. And we'll talk a little bit maybe about crop rotation. I'm not going to get into specific details into too much. I mean, I can go on and on and on about vegetable gardening. I could probably talk about it for 4 or 5 hours. But we're going to try and keep it simple and keep it basic. But when you do a plan, then you have that, and I always like to keep mine so that I can look and refer to them in the future. So next year when I go to plant, I can say, oh, let me see what I did last year. I can't quite remember where I planted everything. It's a really good way of keeping track of what you've done in the past. Plus, you'll know what was successful and what wasn't successful. And that's a little tip that I'll throw out right now, which is you're going to have some successes and you're going to have some failures, and that's okay. Every year that I plant a vegetable garden, something doesn't quite work out, and it's okay. And it could be something like an insect or disease. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. But it could be something that maybe I just didn't have enough sunlight. Maybe I picked the wrong variety. Maybe I didn't stake it correctly. Could be 100 different things. Maybe I didn't feed it correctly. So I'm going to try and run over some of those basics so we don't run into as many of those failures, but just realize that it is going to happen. It happens to all of us gardeners, even experienced ones like myself. We always will fail a little bit, and that's okay. We're going to learn from it. And vegetable gardening is not super costly. It's a very easy thing to get into, and it doesn't cost a ton of money. So you're not going to waste a lot of money if you have a couple failures. But what I really want to build today is the trust of the fact that you'll be successful in a majority of what you do. So I won't use that word failure anymore because we're not going to fail, right? We're gonna be successful. But a couple other key things is I put that picture of the frost up there on that plant because it's important to know your frost dates. So I wanted to make a quick comment about frost dates. Because frost dates can fluctuate as we see from time to time, but frost dates here in the Hampton Roads area are typically easy days to remember. You can always say around tax day is when we should have our last frost. So when we hit about that April 15th time frame, we know we're past the frost date. Now, I typically say when we're talking about tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, zucchini in the Hampton Roads area, I always say May 1st is really the best time. So we're really, pushing for that kind of soil temperature to warm up a little bit. We want it to be a little bit warmer in the soil. We want it to be a little bit warmer in the air, and that way we can grow those. Now, not to say that you can't do other things before that, so we'll get into a little bit of that here as well. But knowing your last frost date in the spring is a good date to remember. And here in the Hampton Roads area, it's about April 10th to April 15th, depending on if you're on the peninsula or here on the south side. Then those dates can fluctuate by a few days, but typically around tax day, it's an easy day to remember. The next date to remember is when the first frost date could occur, and that's about November 15th, November 10th, and that's right around election. So you can always remember tax day and election day. That those are great, easy days to remember because we all typically know them, and we can know, okay, I'm gonna typically have my first frost around the mid-November time frame. I'm gonna have my last frost around mid-April. Good days to remember. Now, I put that picture of the family in there because it's a good idea to know who you're trying to feed, whether it's a family, a loved one, friends, neighbors. It could be a huge group that you're trying to feed. It could be a very small group, but it's important to know those groups because that'll be very important to help you plan how much you want to grow. I think if you've ever done vegetable gardening before, we typically plant way too much to begin with, which is okay. I did it the first year that I ever did a vegetable garden. I planted 15 tomato plants and a bunch of peppers and a bunch of cucumbers, and I had so much stuff, so many crops and so many different vegetables that I didn't know what to do with them. Now I had lots of friends and family, so I was able to give them away. But after that, I said, you know what? I really need to plan and prepare and be ready to know who I'm feeding. I've got my son who is super, super picky, doesn't like a lot of things. So I gotta keep that in mind. Talking to your family and talking to the loved ones that you're gonna be sharing the vegetables with is important to know because you don't want to grow something that goes wasteful. I'm not a super big eggplant eater. I don't eat a lot of eggplant, so I wouldn't grow one. I might grow one for fun, just to grow it, to do it, and I've done that. But I typically grow the things that I like and that my family likes. So it's just another kind of simple planning trick that I think helps out a little bit. Now let's talk about location. Location is very important. And location, we'll talk about sunlight here in a minute because sunlight is very important. But really what I'm talking about when I say location is what are we growing it in, what are we growing it on, or what are we growing it around. So it's kind of important to know the space and the area that you like. Container gardening is a great option. And so I see Sherry just mentioned that. Container gardening is a very easy way to get into vegetable garden because you can do it in a lot of different locations and you can move your containers, which helps if you feel like, okay, I've got it in a spot that I really want to grow it in. Wait, maybe I don't think I'm getting enough sunlight. You can move it. Now, container gardenings come with a little bit of a little bit more preparedness, meaning we need to be able to water a little bit more. We'll talk about that. We need a specific soil. We'll talk about that. And we might need to feed a little bit more because it's going to work through the soil a little bit faster. But container gardening is a great way to start. And there's a lot of different containers that you can grow in. You can grow in plastic, as you can see in this image right here. Plastic containers are great because they're lightweight. They're easy to use, they're affordable, and it's a great way to kind of get started. Plus, you can get some big ones because some of our tomatoes and vegetables and different types of vegetable crops might need a bigger pot. Now, some might need smaller pots when we start to talk about our cole crops like spinach and lettuce and different things like that. And I'll get into all of that information here in a little bit. But container gardening is a great way to do it. You can also grow in clay or terracotta. Now, clay or terracotta is going to dry out a little bit faster, whereas plastic is actually going to stay wet a little bit longer because the air can't get in, whereas terracotta can. Now, air is good for the root system, so you get the benefit of that with clay, but you also are going to have to water a little bit more. So knowing these kinds of little things really help go a long way. Ceramic is also a great option. If you want to do a pretty garden, we can do a pretty garden. In fact, I'm going to talk a little bit at the end here about how we can kind of make it look like, of course, that raised bed garden over there, which looks amazing. So raised beds are a great option. Raised beds are very easy to do, and why raised beds are so successful and why people love them so much is not only one for the look, because the look is great, but it's also because you get to control the soil. So when we do a row planting, like you see right here next to me, that's a great way of getting a lot in the ground, and it's very easy. And if you've got ground space, you can do that. You know, that's the reason that I love containers, is because if you don't have ground space, you can do containers. So you can do this anywhere. But growing in raised beds is great because you control the soil media, and that's what I think a lot of people love about raised bed gardening. It also allows you to start a little bit earlier. Same with container gardening. You can start a little bit earlier because the soil temperature gets higher, gets warmer faster. So that's why a lot of people do it. Also keeps it above the ground level, which means that you're going to get good aeration. You're going to get a lot of air into it, but you're also going to get good water percolation, so you're not going to have to worry about it getting too waterlogged. It's going to dry out a little bit better, but not quite as fast as a container. It also keeps some of the insects and pests out a little bit better because it's a little bit raised up, and you can use cedar boards and different things like that to help. And of course, the look. You know, who wouldn't want a vegetable garden that looks like either one of these two? But raised bed gardening is gorgeous, and we'll talk a little bit about look here at the end to kind of help inspire you to kind of, think above and go above and beyond with your vegetable garden. But raised bed gardening is a great option. You can buy kits, you can buy wood. You don't want to buy treated wood typically because you're not quite sure what it's treated with. You don't want to use pallets because you're not quite sure what was transported on those pallets, but just go get some simple timbers, some simple wood, and you can do it out of a lot of different things. You can do it out of cinder block, you can do it out of brick, you can make a raised bed out of a lot of different things. It's very, very easy, and it's an easy thing to do, and you can also purchase raised bed kits. We sell them here at McDonald Garden Center. And then, of course, we can plant like the farmers do. We can plant right in a row. We can do it very, very simply, and you can go right in the ground, and you can do that very quickly because if you've got the ground space, you can plant. All you got to do is clear the space, get it ready, add some soil, add some amendments. We'll talk about that here next. But you can do that very quickly. Now, typically we grow in rows and a lot of farmers will grow in a little bit of a higher row. They'll kind of mound up the soil, and that's why they call it row planting, because that soil temperature will get up a little bit faster being on that row, and it's a little bit easier for them to work in that kind of environment because you can walk up and down the rows and work on your plants and kind of maintain from there. So, and it keeps it's the best use of space. Now, to get the most amount of vegetables out of your space. Now, growing in the ground comes with its own problems as well. Maybe the soil doesn't drain as well. Maybe you don't want to add all the soil amendments to the entire area. We can conquer a lot of those issues, but it is an easy place to start. It doesn't take any money. You can plant something right in the ground. Just buying your plant and a little bit of soil amendments will go a long way, and a little bit of plant food, and we'll get into all of those here in just a second. So you've got a lot of different locations. That's just 3 options. You can do them in hanging baskets. I mean, I've got, excuse me, I've grown tomatoes in hanging baskets. This is a rosemary. You can grow in hanging baskets. You can grow in the fabric containers, earth boxes. We love earth boxes here. Grown them for many, many years. Earth box is a complete kit. I didn't bring one in here to show you today, but earth boxes are a great container option. Growing in a small space, I will have an image that kind of shows a similar idea as an earth box, but there's a lot of different techniques and a lot of different ways to grow, and it helps with your location. No matter what location you're in, you can grow some vegetables. Now, what we'll need is, of course, soil. Soil is very, very important. Soil is where your plant is going to live and produce and get nutrients from. And so it's a super, super important part to make sure that we're investing in our soil when we plant anything. Because any type of plant, if we're planting a tree that's going to live for 100 years, or if we're planting a cucumber that might only last for 4 or 5 months. So we want to invest in our soil because that's where the plants are going to live. So yeah, Carol just said I've been using city pickers, raised garden beds, and containers. Great. Yep, there's a lot of options out there. So soil is very, very important. Let's talk about containers first. Whenever we're using a container, we want to use a potting soil. Potting soils are designed for a container. They're designed to grow in a pot with a drainage hole. So whether you're planting in an earth box, a terracotta pot, a plastic pot, no matter what you're planting in that's above ground with a drainage hole, then using a potting soil is going to go a long way and really, really help you be successful. You don't want to use a topsoil or just a straight compost, or even you can make your own potting soil if you've got like a bunch of pots that you're going to plant in, but you're probably going to find it's actually more affordable just to buy the potting soil bags themselves. We've got great ones here. We've got an all-purpose potting soil, McDonald all-purpose, and we've got McDonald natural and organic. So we've got two great options that you can grow in, and you can feel safe and comfortable that you've got a good potting soil that you can grow in. Now, if we're doing a raised bed, that's where we get to kind of build almost our own potting soil. We don't have to be worried as much. You're not going to want to do a straight compost mix, but you don't have to worry so much about, all of the amendments being super, super specific and perfect. And you get to control a lot of those amendments. So let's say you like mushroom compost, or you prefer our McDonald compost, or you want a cow manure compost. Whatever you might want to use, you can add those in there. Typically, your elements in a raised bed are going to be compost, some sort of composted material. I like McDonald compost, of course, but that's because it's a bark, based compost. It's a very, very kind of light and fluffy and thick, and it's got some chunks in it as well, which is nice because you get that aeration and it breaks down over time. It's going to constantly release nutrients. So I like ours, but you mix it with a couple different types of compost. You could use straight potting soil in a raised bed as well. So you've got a lot of options there. But compost and then perlite is going to be one of those important ones. That's what you see right here as that person's adding it to that soil mixture. But perlite are those little white styrofoamy things that you see in potting soil. And they're really important because they add aeration to the soil. If you just plant it in straight compost, not only would it heat up too much and get way too hot, but it also won't drain very well. It'll become a muddy mix over time. And we don't want to plant in mud. We want a nice, loamy kind of, rich soil. Peat moss is another great option, especially in raised beds. Peat moss really helps hold in some moisture. It really fluffens up your soil, lightens it up, and allows you to plant in it very easily, and allows aeration and soil and nutrients to work together and root systems to take. So that's very, very important. And then, of course, topsoil could be something that you might add in there if you need to, thicken it up a little bit. So you've got topsoil, compost, perlite, peat moss. Those are four kind of the main ingredients of a raised bed. Topsoil is going to fill it. Compost is going to fluffen it, as well as peat moss. Compost is going to add a lot of nutrients. Perlite's going to break it all apart and keep it nice and aerated. So really, really important to know that. Now, when we're planting in the soil, in our ground soil, we want to keep our ground soil in there. But we also want to amend it. Typically in the Hampton Roads area at least, we don't all have the most amazing soil. And so typically what we like to do is amend it with something. Now you can make it as simple as amending each hole that you plant in. So I could dig this hole maybe just a little bit bigger, a little bit deeper, and then amend the soil, put a little bit of soil back in because we don't want to bury our plants. We want to keep them at level with the soil. But that is how you would typically amend your soil if you're doing each hole. You can also till it in. So if you want to clear a section and then put down compost, put down perlite, and till it in, then that's another great way, because then you don't have to worry about where you're going to plant. Wherever you plant, all your soil's been amended. But that's typically what we're going to do in our area. Our soil lacks the organic matter that we typically need to grow a successful vegetable garden. So we want to add that organic matter back in, and that's what you're going to use compost for. That's going to add the organic matter in, and then the perlite's going to help break it up, because typically our clay-based soil can get very thick, which means it can get hard as a rock in the summer, and it can get very, very wet and soggy when it's raining a lot. So we've got those issues with our clay soil. Now, some of us might live a little bit closer to the coast, and then we go straight to almost a sandy mix. And sandy mixes typically need a little bit more peat moss to help hold in that moisture. Compost and peat moss, you kind of omit the perlite because sand is kind of similar to perlite. It's gonna help break up the soil. The way I always like to describe clay and sand is, imagine a big bin full of volleyballs. Your hand's gonna be able to work right through it. You can be able to see all the nooks and crannies. You'll be able to, it's a nice loose kind of soil or kind of representation of what that is. Now imagine a big bin full of golf balls. It's gonna be very hard to get your hand through that. That'd be your clay soil. And so that's what the problem with it is. Not a lot of aeration, not a lot of pockets for the roots to grow into, not a lot of ways to get the soil and the moisture down through, or get the nutrients and the moisture down through the soil. So we want to amend that and lighten it up whereas a volleyball, a sandy soil, you want to thicken it up a little bit. So we can help with all of those things. Of course, anytime you read a label, you're always going to see rich, loamy, well, moist, evenly moist soil. But we can get there. Our soil isn't naturally like that, but we can make our soil and we can help get it there. But soil is super important. Let's talk about pH here for a second. pH is important, especially when we're talking about a garden that maybe has been sitting, or if you're planting in the ground. If you're planting in the ground, you want to know the pH of your soil. Here at McDonald Garden Center, if you're a Garden Rewards member, which is free to sign up, and you all should do that, then you can get free soil tests. So all you got to do is walk in with a little baggie and we can test your soil. So if you've grown in a raised bed for years and years and years and you haven't tested your soil, it's very important to do that. If you're growing in the ground for the first time, it's important to test your pH. In containers, if you're growing in a container for the first year and you're using a potting soil, most potting soils are designed to be kind of evenly balanced right when you get them. Typically around that 6 to 7 range. It'd be nice if it's right around 6.5. That's what you typically want. That's kind of your broad range of what you want for your vegetable garden, is between a 6 and a 7. So you can also do tests at home. We've got these great little handy pH testers here. These are really easy to use. So this one is just made by Moser Lee. It's a really cool one because it's a moisture, light, and pH meter. So you can set it for whatever you're testing. If I'm testing for pH, I can take it and stick it right in the soil and we can get a test on it. So let's just see here. We got, okay, yep, we got right at a 7. So that's perfect. And then I can put it on light. So I can put it on light, and if I move it closer to the light, it shows it's brighter. If I move it farther away, it shows that it's dark. And then I can put it on moisture level, and it'll tell me if it's moist or dry. So this actually comes in handy for all the vegetable gardening. Do I have enough sunlight? Is my pH right? And do I need to water? And we'll talk about all of those things here. This is a nice little handy one. It's not super precise. It's not going to be as exact as we can get here. So if we want to get a little bit closer, then you definitely want to probably bring in some soil and let us test it just so we can make sure. But pH is important because in the right pH range, if we're in that 6 to 7, 6.5 being kind of ideal, then we know that all the nutrients that are in the soil and all the nutrients that we're going to give it with feed, with our plant food, that it can use all of that. When it's out of whack, when your pH is either too high or too low, then we find that it doesn't get as much of the nutrients that we give it. It can be as low as, let's say if you're a point off or 2 points off, it could be as little as 20 to 50% is all it's getting out of the nutrients that you're feeding it. So if we're putting a lot of money into our fertilizers and we're feeding our plants and the pH is out of whack, then we're not going to be as successful. So that's an important one to know, that pH really, that's what it does, is it unlocks, if you're in the right range, it unlocks the capability of that plant to get the nutrients that it needs. So I see Warren had a question. So once you've created your raised bed soil mixture for one season, the following year, do you need to remove all the old soil and start over, or can you just add to it? If you just add, what do you need to add? So great question, Warren. Yes, you can have an old base soil, and yes, you'll definitely want to add to it. Typically what happens if you use kind of that master mix there at the beginning of topsoil, compost, perlite, and peat moss, then some of those things are going to biodegrade. It's going to settle, it's going to sink, you're going to need to fill it. Now what you've got is a nice mixture, but it's kind of gotten thicker over the time because the compost is biodegraded, so it's becoming finer and finer and finer. And so what you want to do is lighten it up a little bit. So typically what you're going to do is add to an old raised bed is you're going to add compost and peat moss and maybe a little bit of perlite. You don't need to do the topsoil at that time. Basically what you're doing is you're forming a soil that's going to be there, and at some point the biodegradation has to stop and it's got to be a soil, right? So that's what we call a topsoil, right? Is what's on the top of the soil. But you can add compost, peat moss, and perlite. You just won't need as much as you will at the beginning. If you're starting from scratch your raised beds, you're going to need to fill it. That first initial time, you're going to have to fill it. But each additional year after that, you should be fluffing it up, lightening it up a little bit, adding a little bit more, and it allows you the ability to kind of tinker with it and play with it. Maybe this year I want to try mushroom compost. Maybe next year I want to try cow manure, or we've got a land and sea compost. We've got a lot of different things. Maybe you want to just top dress it with a nice new potting soil. There's a lot of different options there, Warren, but great question. But pH is an important one because most of our bark-based compost, anything that's going to compost, anything that's kind of local, is probably going to have, pine, oak, maple in it, and that's going to cause your soil to become acidic over time. And when our soil gets acidic, we've got to raise that pH back up. So when your soil gets down to that 5.5, 4.5, way too acidic, and then the nutrients can't be used by the plants, and that's why you'll want to use a garden lime. So typically, almost always, we're going to talk about lime, because lime is going to sweeten your soil. It's going to bring it up. It's going to bring your pH up. And so this is just a basic one. You can use a lot of different forms. There's Magical, there's this Espoma garden lime, there's a lot of different types. But that'll bring your pH up. Now, soil sulfur is going to bring, or soil acidifier, is going to bring your pH down. Typically, you're not going to probably need that as much unless we over-limed one year and we put way too much lime down. Then you might need to bring it back down a little bit. But naturally, our soil in this area is going to be pretty acidic. So almost always we're talking about lime. Very rarely are we talking about soil acidifier, unless we're talking about specific plants that like acidic soil, like azaleas or camellias or blueberries, for example. If we get into the vegetable or the edible area, blueberries like an acidic soil, so we got to bring the pH down. Let's see, Desiree said, I usually get rid of the old container gardening soil and start new. Is that necessary? So Desiree, it depends on how used up you think it is. And it depends on, in your container gardening, if we're planting in a pot and it's a smaller pot and when you took that tomato out there was a lot of root system, it might have used up a lot of the nutrients. Now I usually shake it off and I just assess the soil, and if it looks okay, then I add to it and just freshen it up a little bit. Now, if I pull it out and it's nothing but roots and the soil's almost eaten up, I usually get rid of it and I start new, clean out my container. If I've had any issues, so if I had some sort of disease or fungus issues, then I definitely am gonna remove all that soil, use some soap and water, and clean out the inside of the pot, let it sit for a day or two, and then go ahead and replant. But that's a great question. You can definitely use potting soil over and over again. You're just going to need to freshen it up, because in a container, we're going to be feeding a lot more. We're going to talk about that here in just a minute. But first, I want to talk about sunlight. Sunlight is very, very important. If we've ever grown a vegetable garden, I know for the past couple of years I've been trying to grow a vegetable garden in a little bit of shade, and it works, but it hasn't been as successful as it would be if it got 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. And so you're going to hear you're going to see that on almost every label for pretty much almost every vegetable plant. You need 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. Now we can blur the lines a little bit with some plants, especially like in the herb world. We could say, with herbs, those types of edibles, even like strawberries, you might be able to get away with a little less sunlight, 4 to 6 hours. But typically, when we're talking about vegetables, which is almost always tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, zucchini, eggplant, peppers, all of those things, we need as much sunlight as we possibly can. Peppers needing the most extreme amount of sunlight. I've always found that peppers do the best if they get almost all day sunlight, or as much as you can possibly get. But let's see if we can get, up into that 8 hours, maybe even 10 hours of sunlight. That's where you'll be most successful with peppers. All of them are a little bit different, but typically you're going to have the most success when you get full sun. So that's why I put that picture of those trees over there, because that's very similar to what my yard gets, is dapple sunlight. And then it gets it from about probably 1 to 3, 1 to 4. So I'm only getting 3 hours of direct sunlight, and it's just not really enough. So I'm going to have to look for a different location for my vegetable garden. I've kind of realized that over the past 2 years. And so where I'm going to have to put it is going to be in a little bit more of a visible location, which is why at the end of this webinar, I'm going to show you some great examples of how you can make that vegetable garden look very kind of cool or unique, or add it into your landscape and kind of create these different looks with vegetable garden. Because I think a lot of us might do a vegetable garden and then say, you know what, I want landscape. I want it to be pretty. I want to enjoy my yard. I want to have a, a staycation. I want to be in my yard. And I don't want to look at, what we might classify as an ugly section of my yard. Because vegetable gardening is not always pretty. But I am going to show you some really cool, inspiring images that might help you think out of the box and kind of do some different ideas. Now, I also showed that picture of that person tying up the tomato because it kind of looks a little leggy to me. And so what I mean by leggy is plants will stretch. So if you're not quite sure if you've got enough sunlight, and then you plant your vegetable garden and you're not seeing the fruit production or the food production be as high as you thought it was going to be, and your plants are stretching, which means they're kind of reaching for the light, which means they got long stems and they're not really breaking with new branches very quickly, it could be a sign of not enough light. I think a lot of us, if we're growing indoor plants, see it a lot. You put our plant, we put a plant, an indoor plant near a window, and it's kind of constantly leaning towards that light. So we're constantly rotating the plant. Well, if you plant in the ground, you can't rotate it. If you plant in a container, you can move it, you can change it. You got that flexibility. If you're in a raised bed and you built your raised bed, make sure you got enough sunlight, that it's getting enough light is very important. So sunlight is very important, but also how we plant or how we start our plants is very important. So this is a kind of a long topic. I've done webinars in the past on seed starting specifically, so I won't get into great detail, but I will say that you can either start from seed or you can start from plant. And so that's kind of a great way to kind of look at it is in that planning process. This probably really goes back to that planning process of how am I going to grow my vegetables? Am I going to start from seed or am I going to start straight from plant? And it's an important thing to think about because if you're going to start from seed, you got to kind of think a little bit ahead of the game. You got to be a little bit more on the planning side. And I will say seed packets are a great option. So I got my little tote over here with my, all my little necessities that I need for seeds. But these are great options to grow vegetables. Now, I love these for my cole crops, for my spinach, lettuce, turnips, beets, carrots, because I'm planting a fair amount of those and they don't take up as much space. However, for like tomatoes, let's see, I don't know if I have a tomato packet in here, but if I look at a tomato packet, typically they're going to have somewhere around 30 to 40, maybe 60 seeds in there. Am I really going to plant 30 to 40 tomato plants? Now, if I'm doing a big vegetable garden, yes, I might. And I might love that specific variety and I might want the seeds for that specific variety. But typically, I would say I usually plant tomato plants. So, for example, I've got one right here. So this is another great way of buying them, is just a single plant. Now I can go buy 4 or 5 different varieties and plant 4 or 5 different plants. And it's very easy to do. I don't have to worry about germination. It's kind of takes it and makes it a little bit simplified. So this is a great way to go, especially if you're doing a smaller garden. This is typically the way most people go. Now, if you're going to grow a big garden, seeds are going to be the economical way to go. And things like cucumbers, I almost always do from seeds because cucumbers tend to come in, this is another one of those tips or tricks, cucumbers tend to kind of come in that bumper crop. Sometimes you'll be successful and you'll have a great kind of full long season of cucumbers producing all season. But cucumbers are pretty quick to produce. They usually have that bumper crop and then sometimes they kind of fizzle off after that. And some of my favorite varieties do that out of design. That's what they do. And so I plant them and stagger them by seed. So again, those are questions that you can ask us that we can help you with because that is there could be a ton of detail that goes into that. What I will tell you is whenever you buy something, whenever you buy seeds, look at the back of the packet. It gives you a ton of great information. One of the most important ones being days to germinate, because that's an important one to remember. 7 to 14 days on this butterhead lettuce. So what I want to know there is, okay, it's going to take 7 to 14 days to germinate. I'm going to want to grow it for another probably 2 or 3 weeks before I actually go and transplant it in the ground. So I'm about a month to 6 weeks. So I'm about 4 to 6 weeks before I'm putting this in the ground. So that's an important thing to remember. It also usually tells you the seed count. So let's see. I don't know if this one actually has it. But yeah, this one's got 80 seeds in it. So I've got 80, little butterhead lettuce that I can grow from here, which is great because you can do this in multiple times throughout the year. It's pretty fast producing. I can do it in the fall. I can do it in the spring. We'll talk about all the plants here specifically in a minute. So for lettuces, I think it works great. For specific plants, it works great. Know how many that come in the packet. That's a good one. And then also look at it because it'll tell you the days to harvest. So days to harvest is 53 to 73 days. So in about a month and a half to 2 months, I'm getting some lettuce. So pretty quick little turnaround on that. Whereas some, if you look at them, let's see, I've got a broccoli in here. So broccoli is going to be 60 to 65 days to harvest. So it just depends. Most of your tomatoes and cucumbers are going to be somewhere in the 80 to maybe even 120 days on peppers. So it's important to read the pack of seeds that you purchase so that you know kind of what you're getting into. Another thing is when you're buying a starter plant like this, an actual plant that you're going to plant, is to look at the label as well. The information on the label is great. We carry a lot of the Chef Jeff varieties. These are all GMO free, which is really, really nice because you don't have to worry about that. But also on the back of the label here is some great information. It tells you a lot about it, but it's also got some information down here at the bottom. So I'll read this one to you. This is Tomato Beef Master, just so you get an idea of what you'd be looking at when you come in. It says large, vigorous vines produce an abundance of superior flavored tomatoes, just the right size for a hamburger. So this is a nice large size. 8 to 12 ounce fruit with a solid and meaty fresh make this tomato a favorite for both taste and production. One of the earliest full-size slicing tomatoes to mature. So that's good information to know. So you'll get a nice slicing tomato earlier than you would with most. And then it says, for best results, feed with a liquid or slow-release fertilizer. It also is multiple disease resistance. And then it's got a list of all the different disease that it's resistant to. So that's an important thing to know. Full sun, of course, it says plant 30 inches apart. So that means it's going to get, you need at least probably 2 to 3 feet between your plants so that you got plenty of space for it to grow in. 80 days to maturity, which gives you kind of a date range of when you'll start to get that kind of bigger crop of tomatoes. And then it says prolific bearer, which means it's going to keep on going. And then usually they say if they're determinate or indeterminate. It's an important one to know on tomatoes. I'll talk about it real quick just because I brought it up. Determinate and indeterminate. Indeterminate means they're going to keep on growing and they're going to keep on producing. And so indeterminate is typically what people want because you get a longer range of growth and a longer range to maturity and a longer range of actual production. Determinate means that it's a determined size. Think of it that way. So determinate means it's going to hit a size, it's going to produce a lot of tomatoes, and then it's going to kind of fizzle out and be done. Now, you might say, well, why would anybody want that? Well, somebody that likes to maybe do sauces that needs a lot of tomatoes and needs a lot of them all in one fell swoop, then it's a great option for them. And if people can or do anything with sauces or anything like soups and stuff like that where they need a lot of tomatoes, salsas, then you might plant those determinate varieties. And determinate varieties are going to be usually a little bit squattier. You don't want to have to stake them as much. They're going to grow to a certain size, they're going to produce a lot, and then they're going to kind of fizzle. But that can be important to know, and that can be important to have for a lot of us that might be growing for specific reasons. Let's see. I've got a question there from Beth. If I want to use a small section of an old flower bed, what is the best way to get rid of the weeds that I can by hand before planting the vegetables? Well, I don't think I have my weed slice, but weed slice is a quick option. It's a tool that's got this little arrow-shaped head, this triangular shaped head that you can go right through and slice out those weeds real quick and you can be ready to plant. You can also spray. So of course you could use any kind of weed killer. Now with weed killers come, issues. One, how long do I need to wait? Most of like your roundups and stuff like that, you're gonna have to wait a week. And then of course you probably don't want to plant in that soil for a while because you've used Roundup. Now there's a lot of organic options now, which are great. Those are gonna be burning agents, which basically means they're just gonna burn the top of the leaves. It's gonna hopefully kill the root system, but it's designed to just burn the foliage off, kill it at a young age. So typically what I would do is use the weed slice because that's going to actually slice up the root system pretty well and hopefully it doesn't come back from that. Now, sometimes when we damage the root system of an aggressive weed, it actually can make it more aggressive. But doing that, if you've got a little bit of time, you might wait a week or two when those new sprouts start to come up of weeds, then you can hit them with an organic weed killer, get them while they're young, and then probably hand pulling is going to be what you're going to have to do for the rest of this season. Now what you can do is also in the fall season, maybe you can take a season off and you can spray it with something stronger that's going to be a little bit more long-term solution for you. Just be careful what you use and ask us questions. I would recommend the weed slice because you could go out there and do it today and plant today. If you use the organic weed killer, I think it's got a 3 or 4 day wait time frame before you can plant. So you could spray and then plant this weekend. So you've got a couple different options for you there. Beth, hopefully that helped you out. All right, so now that we've talked about seed versus plant, because you got a couple options there, let's talk about watering. Watering is super, super important. Another topic that I could probably talk about for 4 hours alone by itself. But I think there's some important rules to follow here. Water in the morning. This is my first major rule, and this is kind of where my tips and tricks kind of start to come in. Watering in the morning is going to be the best option. Watering at night doesn't help your plants at all. When do plants need water? Is when the sun is out, it's warming up, and they need that moisture in the soil. So we always want to water in the morning. So I know if we've got jobs, you might have to get up a little bit earlier and water in the morning. Now we can help you with using soaker hoses and different types of methods to water. However, a sprinkler system is not going to be a good one. So what that means is don't water over top of your plants. We always want to water the root system. We don't want to water the top of the plants. So you can see that guy up there holding that hose spraying, I'm sure just spraying right over the top of plants. We don't want to do that. That is bad for plants. It's bad for almost all plants because watering the top of a plant can cause moisture to get on the leaves and can cause disease and fungus issues. You know, a lot of these fungus spores are in the air and they need something to attach to that's wet. And if you've got moisture on your leaves, then you're asking for issues. So you always want to water the root system of pretty much every plant. There are not many plants out there that only take water in through their leaves and don't take any water in through their roots. In fact, I don't know if there is a plant that exists. There are some plants like air plants that take them in obviously through the roots, in the air, but also through the leaves. And of course, there's things like even crepe myrtles that will actually absorb moisture through the air. That's why they do so well in drought or humid situations. But regardless, all plants will take water in through their roots. So better be safe than sorry. I mean, almost every vegetable plant is going to prefer water on the soil around its root system rather than on its leaves. So don't water over the top of the plants, which is why I wouldn't recommend a sprinkler system. Now, we can combat that if that's the only option you got. We can help with that. I'll talk about disease and insects here in a minute, about how you can be more preventative rather than curative. That's an important one. Disease and insects are another huge topic. But watering the root system is the most important thing, so don't overhead water. Don't use an irrigation system. Don't use a sprinkler that just goes and waters all the tops of your plants. Try and water the root system. A great option to do that is just taking a hose like that one over there and just putting it right at the base of the plant. I want you to water deep and less often. So we want to push those plants a little bit to find their own moisture. Now, most of your vegetable plants are not going to have a hugely aggressive big root system, which means you're going to have to water pretty much through the season. And so installing something like a soaker hose is not a bad option because you can drop that down and then you could actually put it on a timer on your faucet and it can just do it for you. So for those of us that got to get up early and go to work, that don't have time to go out and water a vegetable garden, a soaker hose with a timer might be a great option. And we carry those here at McDonald Garden Center. It's a great, easy way of just knowing that it's being taken care of and you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so always water in the morning, never at night. Dampness and darkness cause fungus, so we don't want to water at night. And that's because plants are going to use that moisture throughout the day. Now, a couple things to think about is we don't have to water as much in the cooler temperatures. As it gets warmer, we're going to have to water a little bit more. Water, and I mentioned this, water heavy less often. And then also, wilting, this is a great tip. Wilting does not always mean that it needs water. You can purchase your moisture meter, or you can go out and use the best tool that you got, which is right here on your hand, your fingers and your hands, and go down there and feel the soil. If the soil is moist and the plant is wilting, we've got too much water. So you want to kind of cut off on the watering. You got to kind of work with your soil. You got to kind of inspect it. You got to kind of understand what you're dealing with. You want the soil to be moist and evenly moist throughout the growing day, throughout the majority of the day, but you actually want it to be a little bit on the drier side going into nightfall. Now, if it's moist for 2 or 3 days and then it dries out for 2 or 3 days, that's not a bad method either. You can really give it a nice dose of moisture and then you can let it dry out. Now, things in the summer get a little bit trickier. When we get a little bit warmer, like tomatoes, a lot of that cracking happens when we've got fluctuations in moisture. So we do want to try and keep it evenly moist. But to get your plants established, water deep less often. It's the best advice that I can give you. Now, how do you water? There's a lot of different things. I can show you 100 different ways that you can water. I love the soaker hose on a timer idea, but if we're going to do hand watering, which is not a bad method, let's make it easy on ourselves. And this is the best tool out there. If you've ever seen me talk about watering, I always pull this out because it's very, very important. This is our Dram watering wand. Comes with an on and off valve, so you can turn it on and off. You don't have to worry about like cranking up the hose or going to the faucet and turning it on and off. And it's got this water breaker on the end, which is really the magic of this, is the fact that this is easy on the plant and on the soil because the water comes out on a nice even kind of ratio. So it's a really, really nice, it's called a rain wand because it emulates rain. What's also really handy is this reach. It's a 30-inch wand, which means I can save my back a lot of heartache and I can get right down to the root system rather than coming over and spraying over top. So if you've got those revolver trigger sprayer things, those are great for cleaning off your car or your driveway. And some plants, you can definitely spray down that way just to cool off. But our vegetable garden, we want to get right to the roots. This is the best tool out there. You can do hanging baskets, you can do pots, you can do it right down in the ground. I'll even take this and just drop it on the ground and let it just come out of this nice water breaker nice and slow. So get yourself, if you're a gardener and if you don't have one of these, then you definitely need to get one. It is my #1 tool. When we talk about watering, you gotta have one. If you look here at the garden center, every single one of our hoses has one of these on the end of it. We water every day, so take it from the experts that water every day that you definitely will want one. Now hoses, there's 100 different hoses out there that you can get, but I will tell you, to make it easy, this is the go-to hose, is the 0G hose. I absolutely love this hose. It's the hose that I use. It's the only hose I'll ever probably use again. You know, we've had all those pocket hoses before, those crinkly hoses, you know, the self-retracting hoses, all of these different ones. This is not any of those. This is a basic hose. It's very, you know, simple. There's no kind of, you know, anything crazy about it, but it is lightweight, and that's what I love about it. It's very, very light. For a 50-foot hose, we got the 100-foot hose as well, but it's really, really nice, lightweight, easy to use. It doesn't shorten up necessarily, it doesn't shrink back up when you turn the water off, but it does allow you to kind of work with it very easily and not have to lug around a big, huge, heavy hose. So I always throw that out there just because if you're looking for a new hose or you hate watering, I always say if you don't like watering, make it fun, make it easy, get yourself some good gadgets, and this is a good one, the 0G hose, and of course, the rain wand. All right, so that's my spiel on watering. Watering is very, very important. It's going to be something that you're going to have to figure out and adjust throughout the entire year because our temperatures are going to change, our humidity levels are going to change. Sometimes the moisture is going to come out of the soil faster, sometimes it's going to stay in the soil a little bit longer. So you got your tool right here, check it with your finger, but you can also get a moisture meter which will help you as well if you aren't quite sure. All right, let's talk about feeding. Feeding is of course extremely important. Vegetable plants are going to need more plant foods, more nutrients than typical plants. You know, if you're planting a shrub like a boxwood or an azalea, you can feed it twice a year, you're okay. If you miss it, it's not gonna be the end of the world, so it's okay. But vegetable plants that are producing things for us, you know, I talk about this a lot when I talk about herbs. You know, herbs need a lot of nitrogen because they're producing leaves and that's what you want it to produce. But vegetables are going to need a lot of nutrients to produce over and over and over again. Why do plants flower, right? So plants are flowering to reproduce. They're flowering to get pollinated, to produce a seed. And that's what we're eating in this case. So all of our tomatoes are basically the holder of all the seeds. All of our cucumbers, they have seeds in them. You know, everything is a seed to the plant basically. And we're taking that off because we're going to eat it. So we're going to take our peppers and our tomatoes off the plant and it's going to keep producing for us. But if we're not providing it the nutrients to do that, it's going to stop. So typically when I talk about like annuals, like blooming plants, I always say deadhead. You know, I'm always talking about going and taking the dead flowers off so that it produces more flowers because we're growing annuals because we want to see the pretty blooms and we want them to keep on blooming. Well, with a vegetable plant, you're taking the seed off, you're deadheading it naturally because you're eating it. But you got to keep those nutrients in there because we want to keep it producing throughout the season. So I've got a couple key ones here that you can see here right here on the screen. But I'll show them to you up close and personal. This is Biotone Starter. This is my #1. If you are planting a new plant, use this. You will absolutely love it. I love it for herbs. I love it for vegetables, trees, shrubs, perennials, everything that I am actually having the ability to take out of its container and put in the ground or put in a pot or put in a raised bed, whatever I'm putting it in, this is my go-to thing. And why is it so important? Because it's not only just a starter fertilizer, it's not only just a starter plant food, it also has micronutrients in it, and it's also got beneficial bacteria and mycorrhizae, which are really, really important because they attach themselves to the root system and it lasts for the entire life of the plant. So that's really cool when we're talking about a tree that might grow for 100 years. It's going to be there and form that symbiotic relationship for years and years and years and years. For a vegetable plant, it might not be as long-lived as far as the root system goes, but it's going to grow much faster. It's going to need less water because the root system is going to double in size much faster because of the mycorrhizae and beneficial bacteria. You will absolutely love this. Trust me, it is my go-to. You got to get it to the root system though. So only time to really use this is right when you're planting because you got to get right around to the root system. So Biotone Starter is the one you want to use. Now, if we're talking about tomatoes specifically, we can get you covered with a straight up tomato tone. Tomato tone's a good one. I love Espoma's products because they're all organic, they're all safe, you don't have to worry about it. What I also like about them is for, you know, us newbies or sometimes, you know, we don't have a lot of time or we make a mistake and we accidentally dump the entire bag on it, it's not gonna kill it. So we can always be safe with that. They're nice light formulas. Now, because they're lighter, we're going to need to feed a little bit better, or a little bit more often. So with an Espoma organic product, I'm going to recommend somewhere around every 3 to 4 weeks, probably giving a little bit of a dose of food, and that's going to get more and more as the season progresses. Our little starter tomato plant here, I'm only going to put probably about, a half a handful, maybe a quarter cup, something like that. But then as that tomato plant gets bigger and bigger, when we get that 5-6 foot high tomato plant, then I might be up to about 2 or 3 cups. So we carry this in multiple sizes. This is a little 4-pound bag. This is get 1 tomato, 2 tomatoes through an entire season. But if we're talking about an entire season, then I might get a bigger bag. We've got an 18-pound big size bag. Now, if you're growing lots of different types of vegetables, then Garden Tone might be a good option. Garden Tone is great for all of them. So what's really nice about these as well is the calcium that's in them. Calcium is important because if you've ever gotten that black spot on the bottom of your tomato, or even peppers, or even squash, it happens a lot to those, then that's a calcium deficiency, and that's what this helps with as well. So having that calcium in there will actually prevent that blossom end rot, is what it's called. And blossom end rot can ruin, all of a sudden you've got these great looking tomatoes. Oh, I've got hundreds of tomatoes growing, and then all of a sudden you look and all the bottoms of them have a black spot on them. And that's called blossom end rot, and calcium is what fixes that. And you can get that in a lot of different forms. I mentioned Veggie earlier. It's a great option, but Garden Tone is a really, really good option because it's got calcium in it. So remember I mentioned those micronutrients, it's got them. And it's of course got all those mycorrhizae and beneficial bacteria as well. Not as much as the Biotone starter, which is why I recommend that at first. But Garden Tone is a good even balance. I like this one because I'm growing spinach and lettuce, and I can use it on my herbs, and I can use it on my tomatoes and cucumbers and squash and peppers and everything else that I might be growing. So Garden Tone's a great all-purpose one, and we carry it in the big 18-pound bag as well. So of course, plant foods are super important, and you can get very, very specific, or you can get very, very broad. Pretty much anything that you're ever going to read is going to say something like 10-10-10. So 10-10-10 fertilizers or plant foods are basic and broad. And so that's why pretty much every article that you're going to read is going to mention 10-10-10, because they're just putting it in there. So when you come in to see us, it's going to be hard pressed to find a 10-10-10. I do carry one. But we're going to always recommend something specific that gets you right into the wheelhouse of what you're growing so that you're going to be the most successful. All right, so I think I saw a couple questions there about fertilizer. Let's see, we've got, can you use tomato fertilizer spikes in other vegetable plants? Container gardening. So Sherry, yes. I personally don't love the fertilizer spikes. Yes, if you've got them, use them up. But what I tend to find with fertilizer spikes is they feed a specific side of the plant or a certain area of the plant. Nutrients work down, work with gravity. They don't typically go down and then just naturally spread all the way around the plant. So I definitely recommend planting or using a granular fertilizer. I think that's really, really important to help even that entire plant and keep it nice and nutrient rich all throughout the season. So that's why I like a granular plant food. I can put it right around the plant. You typically want to put it right around the root system, and that way it's working all the way down and getting to all those roots. But if you got the spikes, I definitely say use them up. And using them in a container is completely fine. Now, container planting I mentioned earlier, that brings up a good point. I didn't mention that. With feeding in a container, we're going to have to feed a little bit more. Raised beds, containers, and even in the ground, we're probably using nutrients about the same proportion. Now, in a container that's draining really, really well, I might use it a little bit more frequently. I might go every 2 to 3 weeks. But in the ground or in a raised bed, I'm using probably about every 3 to 4 weeks, just because they're using that nutrients. It's using it, it's pumping, you got to pump it. So let's see, I think there was another one. As a newbie, thank you so much. A lot of knowledge being gained. Good, well, I'm glad. I'm glad this is helping everybody out. Let's keep on rolling then. Let's see what next I want to talk about real quick is a little bit about insect and disease. Again, another very, very big topic. I could talk about it for hours and hours and hours, but you're going to have insect and disease issues. I'm just going to be honest with you. It's going to happen at some point, but hopefully it doesn't. I would love it if it never happened to you, but everybody's going to have a little bit of an issue with one of their plants at some point, and the best advice I can tell you is let us know as soon as you possibly see it. So it's important to kind of inspect your garden every once in a while. Walk around it, especially as we start to get into the growing season, those plants start to get bigger. Spend some time. You might not be in the fruiting period. It might not actually be producing anything for you at that point, at that specific point, but walking through there, checking it, it's a great tip. Just spend a good 10 minutes walking through, inspecting your plants, looking at the leaves, underneath the leaves, seeing if you feel like they look good. Like this tomato up here with that leaf curl going on, that doesn't look right. Maybe I need to take off a piece and take it to McDonald Garden Center and have them look at it. See if we can cure the problem before we get there. If you see bugs, some of them that are super camouflaged, like that tomato hornworm over there, they're hard to spot, but all of a sudden you start seeing leaves disappearing. And then it's like, okay, now I've got a problem. Now, you might also have problems with squirrels or rabbits or deer. We can help you with all of those things. So like Sherry just mentioned, I'm battling mealy bugs on some of my houseplants right now. Yep, so we're all gonna have insect issues. We're all gonna have disease issues at some point. It's not our fault. It is part of nature, but we can solve it and we can help you solve it. And so that's why I'm going to kind of go with it. I'm not going to go into super detail and talk about every single one. I see, Carol mentioned squash borers. Yep, squash borers are horrible. Squash bugs are bad. I mean, there's a whole list of things that can really ruin your garden. One thing that I will tell you is being proactive and kind of getting ahead of the game is always better than trying to fix it. So being, kind of rather than curative, getting out there and getting started early is a great option. And I love triple action. Triple action is a great one. It's completely organic. It's got neem oil and pyrethrin in it. And pyrethrin is going to be the strong insecticide part of it, but it's from chrysanthemum oil. So it's a really easy, organic way of kind of really hurting the insects, that especially at an early age. And then of course, the neem oil is going to be a suffocant. And you can buy just straight neem oil. We carry just straight neem oil, also organic. So this is our Fertilome Natural Guard, and this is our Fertilome product. And I should say this, I guess I should say real quick, the ready to use is not certified organic, but all of our concentrates are of the triple action. I love the triple action. I like to get the hose end and just take it out there and just give it a spray every 2 or 3 weeks, especially in the early parts of my season, because it'll help kind of ward off anything that might be starting. So better to be proactive than reactive, and get out there and treat it a little bit beforehand, just so you know you're not gonna have problems, especially if we know we've had problems in the past. You can get neem oil. Neem oil works really good. I also grab just spinosad soap, really good option as well. This is an insecticidal soap and spinosad, and it's a really easy way of kind of killing a lot of different insects. So for mealy bugs, this might be a great one for you, especially on your houseplants, because it works inside on a lot of those bad insects that get into our houseplants. And it's completely safe and organic, so if we've got pets, we don't have to worry about it. And we typically are going to want to use organic products on our vegetable plants. Now, you don't have to. There's a lot of old traditional products that you can use, like Sevin and different ones, Carbaryl and all of those. But a lot of those will be coming off the market at some point, right? Because they've been on the market for a long time, and eventually they're going to take them off. And so we're looking at new organic options out there. We're always constantly looking for new ones. When it comes to worms, of course, we love bacillus, which are beneficial bacteria. So BT, if you've ever heard that, or dipel, great options. And there's hundreds and hundreds of things I could talk about. We've got a really nice biologic fungicide. That's a really good one for any of those disease issues or fungus issues that you might be having. That's made by Monterey. We carry that one. It's called, I think, Complete Disease Insect Control, or Disease Control, Complete Disease Control. And that's a really good one because it's completely safe as well, and it covers a lot of them. It's a very broad spectrum kind of fungicide disease control. So I'm not going to go into a lot of specific detail because there's hundreds of things that might happen to your plants. All I'm going to say is try and get ahead of the game and do something before it becomes a problem, and using something like triple action or even just a basic neem oil just to kind of suffocate anything that's starting before it really gets aggressive is going to be helpful. But also, if you've got a problem, just bring up a piece, let us look at it, let us check it out, and see what we can do to help you. Warren said, are those sprays safe to use on the fruits, and can you eat right away? So some of them have specific time frames, for sure. And great point, Warren, because sometimes I forget to tell people that. There's a little book on the back of every single product that you might buy for insecticides or fungicides. And in that book will tell you all of that information. I don't know that I know it all off the top of my head. I want to say with triple action, you're about 3 to 5 days to harvest, and it depends on each plant. That's why there's a book back here, because it tells you if you spray a cucumber, you got to wait 3 to 5 days to harvest. Now, some of them are going to be pretty much right away. You can harvest the same day. I'm not quite sure about neem oil. I don't want to say something that's wrong. but some of them are going to tell you. So, so definitely, Warren, just read your book, read your information. You can, of course, come in and we'll help look all of that information up for you. If it's something that you want to be able to spray and then eat on the same day and harvest on the same day, then we can definitely let you know about that when you come in and talk to us. So Carol said, what's the best time to spray the insecticide? That's a great question. Again, dampness and darkness cause fungus issues. So we don't want to spray, even when we're spraying for a fungus, we don't want to spray at night. We typically want to spray early in the morning. Now, in the heat of the day, it's a great point, and I didn't think about that. That's why this is a very big topic. But something like a neem oil that's a suffocant is going to be an oil. It's going to coat the leaf of the plant. So when the temperatures get above 90, which they'll get, eventually here, then you're going to create kind of a little mini greenhouse effect right here on top of the plant. And what that means is it's going to suffocate the insect, but on a hot sunny day, it can actually burn your leaves up. So you want to be careful with any kind of oils. And all of your insecticides, fungicides, whether they're organic or traditional, are going to have a book on them that are going to give you all of that information. And if you want to get specific, I would definitely say come in and let us talk to you. Be careful with your oils for sure, whether it's a horticultural oil or a neem oil, a canola oil, whatever it might be that you're using. Definitely want to be a little bit careful as our temperatures get warmer. A lot of them now say that they can, you don't have to worry about temperature. I still get on that side of, well, better safe than sorry, right? Now, you also might be saying what time of day in the morning is always better than in the evening. If you got to do it in the evening, it's not the end of the world because we're spraying for a specific reason, but we always want to keep those leaves nice and dry going into the nighttime frame because dampness and darkness cause fungus. All right, let's see. So let me talk about a couple of my favorite tips that really helped me be successful for my first couple years of gardening, vegetable gardening, and especially when we're talking about tomatoes and cucumbers and squash. I think these tips really helped me be successful very quickly. One is be prepared to stake your plants. So I got that picture over there of somebody staking that tomato plant. Be prepared for that. I'm going to show you a couple great little tools for that here in a second. But be prepared, get your supplies ready because you're going to need to stake your plants, especially if we're being successful, right? So if we're feeding it a lot and we've done all the right things to it, then that plant's going to get pretty big and we got to support it because tomatoes specifically, but even peppers and cucumbers need something to support them typically. Even if they're a small one, I always say, there's a lot of these great bush varieties, but I still like to put a little stake in them just to make sure that they're supported because they're growing so quickly and some of the fruit sets can get so big, we don't want them to fall over and topple over. And then when they're on the ground, they cause issues, right? We get into the disease and insect issue, which also leads me right into pruning. Pruning is a great thing to do. And really what I mean there is you don't always have to prune the tops of your plants. Pruning the top of your plant will produce more branching, but you are going to prune off probably some of its flowering and some of its fruiting. So if it's getting too big for your tomato cage and it's just breaking, it's falling apart, and you want to give it a little bit of a prune back, then that would be one reason to do it. But really what I like to tell people is prune it to have a little airflow. So you see this person down here mulching, and you see how it's a little, it looks like a pepper to me. That is, and it looks almost like a little tree, right? It's got that space from the ground to the start of the first kind of sets of leaves. That's really, really good to have that airflow underneath. It prevents the disease and humidity issues that can be caused as we get further and further along into the season. So I always like, when I talk about pruning, is to limb up all of my tomato plants, especially tomatoes, but even peppers. I like to get those leaves up at least maybe 12, maybe even 18 inches off the ground because it's really going to help. If you get a heavy rainfall and all that dirt splashes back up onto the bottoms of those leaves, they're going to fall off anyways. So while they're young plants, plant them. I'll show you this here in a second because I don't think yeah. So here, these little leaves down here at the bottom, they're not going to do much. I mean, this one's already kind of not looking real hot. So when I plant, you can sometimes just take these off and just pop them right off. Just using, these are their little starter leaves. These are the original leaves. And so those, won't need to really kind of be on there. So I usually take these little guys off right when I plant it, and then I'll plant it just like that. So I've already got a little start of a tree, right? As it grows up, I'll probably keep on limbing it up. That's what I call limbing it up. I'll keep taking some of these lower branches off to allow that main center stalk to really get formed well, and also to keep those leaves from getting close to the ground and keeping that airflow underneath the plant. That's really, really, I think, a helpful tip. I'll go back real quick and just say my last major tip before I show you some great ways to stake up your plants is mulch. For years and years and years, I'm sure, even in a raised bed, even in a container, but especially in the ground, I definitely recommend mulching. It is going to help you immensely. If you've ever grown in just a soil bed without a mulch, you know it's a pain to water. It heats up very quickly. It's not super appealing looking too, so it doesn't look real great. But mulch is really, really helpful. Mulch adds nutrients to the soil over time as it breaks down, but it also keeps moisture in, and it allows the soil to stay more evenly moist, so it's going to actually improve things over time. It's going to prevent the splatter of dirt up on the leaves as much, and it's really going to help you when you water. When you water on a mulch, it really nicely seeps in. It works into the soil much easier. It's almost like a breaker on top of the breaker. You know, it kind of really helps break up that water flow and helps it evenly work its way into the soil. Whereas if you just water right on top of soil, what always happens? It's running every different direction. It's never soaking right into where you want it. You feel like you're kind of doing a little, spray job over the top of the soil and then having to move back and forth and go back and forth to each plant. But in a mulch, you can just drop your hose, you're saturating the area, you're getting it nice and wet, and you don't have to worry about it as much. And it keeps it nice and fresh looking, it keeps it good looking, and it keeps it more evenly moist over a consistent time frame. Plus, if we're growing things like squash or watermelons or strawberries or anything that maybe lay on the ground when it produces, zucchinis, things like that, maybe our tomato plant falls over and we're just letting it grow like its natural self, a vine, then you want that mulch to help protect it, keep that fruit off of the dirt, or keep the dirt off the fruit. So it's a really, really helpful tip. I think mulch is super, super important whenever I talk about vegetable gardening. It's something that I didn't do the first year, I did the second year, and I was amazed that the success rate went way up and it was so much easier. And because it was kind of part of my landscape when I first did it, it really made it look nice. So great question, Desiree. What can I use? Lots and lots of different things. Can I use clippings, grass clippings for mulch? Yes, you can, as long as you haven't treated them with anything. You want to make sure you haven't treated them with a fungicide or some sort of insecticide that may be in the leaf. If you've fertilized recently, you might not want to use your grass clippings. Typically, what I like to do with grass clippings is put them in a compost pile, and then I'll use something like a pine straw. Wheat straw would be fine, except I always get wheat growing in my wheat straw. I always typically like hardwood mulch, so I usually just use a shredded bark mulch. I think it's prettier, it's easier to work with. Pine straw is going to make your soil more acidic, but really so are barks as well, because most of your bark is going to be pine bark typically. Dyed mulch, Dana, great question. Dyed mulch typically nowadays are all safe. I know the dyed mulch we use is safe. I don't know if it's 100% organic, but it is safe to use around edible plants. And I think pretty much everybody has made their dyed mulch very safe for vegetable plants. So check the bag. You might have to check the website of the company. I know for a fact that our mulch is, but dyed mulches typically nowadays are very safe because they're not 100% sure where you're going to use them, and they're assuming that you could use them on a vegetable garden, and so therefore they're making them safe. But you can also just get a regular natural mulch, cypress, cedar, pine bark chips, pine bark straw, or pine straw. There's 100 different things that you can use out there, and they're all going to benefit your garden. You're going to be amazed at the success that goes through the roof, and it's going to make your yard look better. It's going to make your vegetable garden look better, and it's just going to improve the success rate for sure. Keep the nutrients, keep the moisture, keeps everything kind of right there locked in, and kind of finishes it off. So that is one of my biggest tips, is definitely to mulch. And those are great questions. You can use lots of different things. I definitely would say for the grass clippings, even if I took like a stump and had a stump grinded out and had all these wood chips, I would probably let them sit for a while, because when wood biodegrades at an earlier state, typically, especially if it's in a lot of moisture, you're going to get a lot of fungus growing on it, which is why, if you have a log that sits out in the woods, or if you ever see mushrooms growing up in your yard, what is that from? It's from a piece of wood underneath the ground that's rotting and decaying, and a fungi is attached to it. It's helping kind of eat up that wood. And so I typically say let it sit for a while. That's why when you get a mulch, it should be aged properly, and most of the mulches are these days. So they're put in big piles, they're kind of heated up to a degree where you're not going to have any insect or disease issues, and also they're aged so you know that you're not going to have any of those fungus issues. Not to say it can't happen, it can still happen, but it typically won't happen as much as if we just went out and took some chips from a tree that we had cut down. So good questions there. All right. So now I want to talk about real quick, just a little bit of inspiration here, because I've talked about all the different locations that you can grow, and I've talked about all the different things that you can do. And this, for the beginner gardener, use these as kind of inspirations, but also don't let it kind of, get you scared either. I've been gardening for 10 to 15 years, and I'm probably just about to start doing any of these kind of ideas. So it's taken me a long time to kind of say, I really want to do vegetable gardening in a real way, and I really want to do it in a nice looking way, because especially for me, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be a little bit more visible to me. It's going to be at the end of my driveway, most likely. So I want to make it look appealing. And so I started thinking about, how can we make it creative? How can we be creative about how we can, make our vegetable garden a little bit more appealing? So I kind of brought these pictures in just to kind of show you some examples of, one small space gardening. If we're in a small space, we can have these nice little wood raised planters. Typically, you're almost always going to see it a little bit more on the rustic side. Not to say that it can't be on the, more modern, upscale side, but typically you're going to see it a little bit more rustic, which I think is very good. I think that works perfectly into a vegetable garden and can work really into pretty much anybody's landscape or decor. So in a small space, you can have these really nice boxes. You can build those yourself, or you can buy them prefabricated. We carry lots of different types of raised beds or containers that you can grow in, window boxes, things like that. So think outside the box, even if you're planting in the box. And then I mentioned earlier the earth box system. This is probably very similar. I don't think those are 100% earth boxes there, but even this I think is cool looking. So this is a great way to kind of add that kind of small. I've got a small space, but I want to grow lots of tomatoes, and I want it to look kind of cool. So this is a great way of doing that. So you can see as I move my image around here, it's just kind of a little alcove that they can walk into. And they can see, they can, mess with, attend to all of their tomato plants, but it's cool looking. It's very appealing to me. So I think that's kind of a cool, interesting way of doing it. And earth boxes are designed that way, that they actually have casters and wheels on them. And they have staking systems and all of these different things. And when you buy an earth box for the first time, you get a planting kit that gives you everything you need. All you need is the soil and the plants. It gives you all the fertilizer and all the lime and everything that you need. And it's a really cool system. That could be a whole hour discussion just about earth boxes. But come in and check them out. They're a great way to grow in small spaces. And this is a great example of that. Let's see. This is also a great way of doing it. So, yes, raised beds are amazing. But this will be something you'll hear me say for the next 5, 6 pictures. Add height to your vegetable garden. It really, really helps. It helps make you feel like you've accomplished something, because a lot of your plants are going to be small over the seasons. So, you got a lot of different, time frames throughout the year that it's going to be a little bit different for you. And then, of course, doing something simple and unique like this is a very good way of doing it. So this one, let me get myself out of the way here. You can see just this brick edging in the back. So it's just a little bit of a brick edging. It's probably a little bit of a pathway that they've built through their vegetable garden. And you can see they're just planting one of each thing. So they've got, one squash, they've got a tomato here, and then they've got a row behind it that looks empty right now. But just a kind of unique way of kind of creating that look. It's a cool look, but it also keeps it simplified. It doesn't have to be super elaborate. Rustic is always works for vegetable gardens. So rustic is a great way to do it. Making your own cages out of twigs and branches, or using old bamboo pieces is really, really cool. Works great in kind of a colonial setting, but also works really, really well in any kind of vegetable garden. Row it up, and keep it very, very organized. When you have a nice organized rows, it's very appealing to the eye. It looks great, especially when you can do something like these lettuces and cole crops, which will change up your colors. You can get the red lettuces, then the bright greens, and some of the blues with your, different types of cabbages and kales. So lots and lots of options to make even rows look very, very nice. Just keep them super organized, super simple, super clean, and it's a really, really nice look. Of course, growing in a raised bed, I'm going to show lots of images of raised beds here, because they add to that look and that appeal. But having even just plant markers in there. We carry a lot of great plant markers. I love this, set of slate markers here that you can put into your vegetable garden. It's just a great way of adding, even to a container. If we've got container gardens, add some stakes to it. One, it helps you kind of identify what it is, especially if you're a beginner, but also it just kind of adds to the look. So it's just a great way of making your vegetable garden look a little bit nicer and a little bit different. Here's another great small example of a vegetable garden in a raised planter, but also they've got another terracotta planter over there. So it's kind of a mixed use. They've got different things going on, small space, easy to get to, and it's a cool look, really nice. And then of course I love the raised beds in rows with a mulched walkway. It's going to make it easier on your back. It's going to make it more appealing. You're going to have less weed issues. So doing something, if you're doing raised beds, you might clear some land around it as well and clear some of the grass out and just put down mulch so that it's nice and comfortable to walk on. You can kneel on it. You can bend over easily. You can put stuff down like, a watering can or your pruners, and you're not going to lose them in the grass. And you deal with less insect and disease issues when you've got a nice mulched area, even around your raised beds. So this is just a great way of doing that, and just having everything nice and neat and organized really adds to the look. On your deck or porch or patio, if you've got an area and maybe maybe our grandparents are older and maybe they can't get around as well, and you want to put something that they can sit at and enjoy, this is a great option. Is building a table like this. These are super simple to build, or you can buy them prefabricated and you can put them right together yourself. They're very easy to do, and it keeps it right at an easy level for you to be able to sit at if you want to, but also to enjoy on your deck or porch or patio. For a long time, food tables were really popular, where you have a big dining table outside, an outdoor table that had a planter section in the middle that you plant all your herbs in. You could fresh pick them and put them right on your food right there. So lots and lots of options. If you've got a good sunny spot, then this would be a great option to do something smaller in a smaller location that's a little bit closer by that you can tend to a little bit easier. Another example of a raised bed garden, again with the rock this time, so really, really cool look, keeps it nice and simple and clean. Really, really nice looking. And then of course, going back to that height thing, using any kind of trellises or supports to kind of add that height is a great option for you to be able to do that and make your vegetable garden stand out a little bit more. Here's another great example of just a very simple TP effect, basically taking two stakes, going down, adding a bar across the top, and then now we've got our supports for our beans to grow on. Really easy, simple way of doing that. You can even use old pieces. So this probably is an old mattress frame or an old fence structure. Using things like that is very cool. It keeps it rustic, it keeps it urban, keeps it kind of cool looking, and that's a great support system. Whether you're growing the peas or the green beans on them right away, or they're just sitting there just as an architectural feature, I think is really interesting and unique. Using arbors, trellises, pyramids, different types of things like that. And then of course, growing in containers. I love growing in containers. If you're doing containers, group them all together, get different types. So like you can see here, these are all different types of terracotta planters. There's even maybe even a rustic planter in there. And having all of them be different is cool. They're all different sizes. They're all a different look. And they really kind of add to that look of, hey, look, this is a really unique grouping of containers that are edibles. So we've got peppers, we've got some lemongrass over here. We've got a bay tree. So really, really nice assortment. There is a tomato back there in the back, but it's a really kind of cool way of adding all of those together. So, all right, before we end up, let me talk real quick about some of my favorite vegetables that I like to grow around this time of the year. So, we're talking about spring. I'll talk about cole crops real quick. Cole crops are C-O-L-E. I don't want to get into, again, too much detail. Now you've got all the basics. You can grow any of the vegetable plants. You can go grow any of the vegetable plants because now you know where to plant them. You know what the sunlight is that you need. You know when to feed them. You know how to water. You know if you end up with an insect or disease issue, you know where to come and talk to the experts about it. You're armed with all the necessary things to be successful in your vegetable garden. But you might be saying, what do I plant? Well, we can help you with that. And if you come into the garden center, you're also going to see what's available to plant, and what we're selling is going to be timely. And that's what you get out of a local garden center. You always know when you purchase a plant from us that we know it's good time to plant it. So right now, as we get into our spring season, we want to talk and we want to plant our tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers and squash and zucchini. Before I get to that, let's talk about what we could have planted, and you still could actually get away with a little bit here as we experience cooler weather sometimes, is in the spring season, but also in the fall, is cole crops. That's C-O-L-E, not cold, not C-O-L-D, although it's a good way to remember it, because these plants, these vegetable plants, grow in cooler weather. So things like spinach and lettuce and carrots and turnips and beets, a lot of root vegetables, kales, cabbages, lots of those you can grow in the cooler time frame. So you want to typically start those in the fall. Broccoli fits in there, cauliflower. There's a huge assortment. And a story that always really kind of made it resonate with me is, when the colonists settled here in Hampton Roads in Jamestown, that's what they lived off of, is the cole crops, the spinaches and the lettuces and the broccolis and the carrots and the turnips and the beets. That's what they lived off of. They were not very successful with corn and tomatoes and peppers and those types of things. It was a little bit of a learning curve. And so while they're a lot of fun to grow, and that's what I encourage people to typically start with, because it's usually the season that you're coming out to say, hey, I want to start a vegetable garden. I've always wanted to grow my own tomato. Now I want to grow it. It's a great place to start. But when you finish up your tomato season, think about planting some spinach and lettuce and carrots. They're amazing, they're easy, and they're very bountiful. And that is what supported our colonists when they settled here back in the 1600s. So it's a kind of a cool story because it's local, and it's also very true that is what supported them. That's what kept them going for the first few years until they learned how to grow these different things and traded, and learnred how to grow the corn and different types of things that really helped them, build out their settlement. So cole crops are very, very important, and you can come and get those in the fall. You can also do them in the spring season. A lot of people start them in February, March, and then plant them, and you have a really nice window there in the March, April, even into May timeframe to get a good crop out of those. I love to plant them in the fall because typically our winters aren't that bad, and you can be picking off your spinach and lettuce all the way through the winter season. So it's a great way of adding to your seasonality of your vegetable garden. But let's talk about some cucumbers and squash and tomatoes real quick. Because I've got a little assortment here, and I won't go into great detail, again, just to say that we of course carry lots and lots of different varieties, and now is the time to come in and check these out. But some of my favorite ones to grow, or some of my favorite plants to grow, I've done lots of webinars about some of my favorite things, but tomatoes are one of my go-tos, of course. Tomatoes are a great way to start. They're extremely rewarding because they grow pretty quick, and you get this nice big plant real fast. It's like whenever I talk about a landscape plant that maybe somebody wants to grow, I always like to go to roses or hydrangeas because they grow fast. You're successful within the first year. You're getting blooms. They're easy. They're fun. And that's the same with tomatoes. Tomatoes are pretty easy. Yes, we can all run into issues with them in the future. We might need to be proactive and prevent some things. But typically, if you come in, we can help you get some of our favorite tomatoes. And you always know that if you buy one, like a Chef Jeff variety, that they're grown for a reason. They're grown because they're disease resistant or insect resistant, because they are high producing and high yielding. So they're going to be some of your better varieties that you're going to get. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in future webinars. And I've done it in the past. If you want to go back and look at any of the webinars that I've done in the past, talked about specifically what the information on the labels. There's different things like an AARS winner, or it's got your premiums up at the top, which means they're a little bit of a select group. There's heirlooms. There's lots and lots of different choices out there. But tomatoes are definitely must when you're planting a vegetable garden for the first time. You always got to start with the tomato plant, even if you don't like them that much. I think I'm the only one in my family that really likes tomatoes, but I love to grow my own. Let's see, what else? Okra. Okra is a lot of fun to grow. I don't know a lot of people that eat a ton of okra, but okra is a really, really fun one. It's an easier plant to grow. It's nice and sturdy. We don't have to usually stake it too much, so this is a great option. Okra is a lot of fun. And then, of course, squash. Love my squash. This is Superset. Superset's a really, really easy one. It's an AAS winner. This is yellow neck squash. So really, really great one. It does take up some space on the ground. It is a ground grower typically. Some people will stake them. Some people will grow them as a little bit of a vine. But typically you grow them right on the ground or hanging out of a raised bed or a container. And they're really, really easy. They're very prolific, and one of those kind of high success rates on squash. Now, of course, there's squash borers, there's squash bugs, there's a lot of different things out there that can happen. We can help you treat those if you run into them. Hopefully you don't run into them. And of course, peppers. Let's see, where's my pepper? Here we go, here's one. Peppers are a great option. This one's Red Beauty. So, you know, really, really nice one. You can get red, you can get green, you can get yellow. And the sweet peppers, you can get cayenne peppers, you can get the hottest pepper out there. Let's see, I think they grabbed this one's called Trinidad Scorpion Pepper. So we've got the super, super hot ones if you want to test those out. We've got medium range spiciness. And of course, we've got lots and lots of sweet peppers. And peppers are a lot of fun. My biggest tip for peppers, give them as much sun as you possibly can. And be patient. Peppers do take a long time. You know, if we look at our maturity rate on this, we're probably around 75 to 80 days. So, you know, that's kind of pushing it there. You'll start to get some peppers, but really, when you typically see your peppers doing the best is closer to into the fall time frame. Usually it's August, maybe even September before you really see them be super, super prolific. So that's the tricky thing about vegetable gardening here in the Hampton Roads area is you always want to build your own salad out of your vegetable garden. Very rarely do you get that opportunity to have salad, you know, lettuce and then tomatoes and then cucumbers and then, you know, onions, all of that to come together at one time is kind of tricky. So sometimes we're always buying a little bit of those elements from the supermarket, from the grocery store or the farm stand. But typically, we're not going to be able to build our own salad right out of our vegetable garden. Not to say that it can't happen. It can definitely happen. We can do it. But it takes a little bit more, you know, training and expertise to kind of get there. So, of course, eggplant. I mentioned that earlier. Eggplant's awesome. I personally don't eat a lot of eggplant, but it's a very easy one to grow. It's very kind of stalky, so it doesn't need as much as support, although the fruit does get big. So I typically do put a cage around it. So those are some of my favorites. Let's see, did I miss anything? Peppers, cucumbers. I don't know if I grabbed a cucumber. I don't see a cucumber, so maybe I didn't grab one. But cucumbers are a really good one. You know, cucumbers, there's lots and lots of flavors, and every kid loves cucumbers. So really, really nice. And then, of course, this is our green arrow. This is a pea, so you can get peas too. And see, these are vining. So you can grow snap peas, you can grow sugar peas, you can grow green beans, you can grow lots of different things. Pole beans need a pole, whereas bush beans can grow right on the ground. You got lots and lots of versatility. I could go into detail, but I'm already gone long enough, so I'll just stop there and say we've got a huge assortment of vegetables here at McDonald Garden Center, and you got to come check them out. And of course, you know, add to the look and the appeal. The one thing that I didn't talk about was staking. I kind of skipped over that. So if you want to stick around, I will talk about staking real quick. Tomato cages are, of course, everybody's kind of go-to for the first year. Now, if you're growing a smaller tomato, tomato cages can work. So if you're growing some of those determinate varieties or even the bush varieties, tomato cages can work. But typically a tomato cage isn't going to be quite big enough for like a full-blown size tomato. Now in a container, this is going to be your best option. It's going to be a really, really good option. But I do have another option. So tomato cages work well for some of your squattier, bushier plants. Eggplant, I'll actually grow a lot of cucumbers on a tomato cage. It's real easy to do. But what I love is this all tomato cage. So this is our second year carrying these. These are absolutely awesome. Maybe it's our third, but these are really, really cool. And I'm not going to open it up and build one for you because I'm running out of time here. But basically you get 3 of these big, nice, thick, sturdy stakes inside. And then you get these clips that go all the way around it. And let's see if I can hold up the package here so you can kind of see it. So basically what you're doing is building a cage. Now what's cool about this one, the all tomato cage, is let's say you forgot to get a cage and my plant's, you know, 3 feet tall and all of a sudden I see that it's falling over and I need to support it better. Well, this is something that you can add any time of the year and you can add it to it whenever you want to because you're building it around it. What's also nice is you can support it as it gets taller. So you can move the arms up to a little bit of a higher spot. And this is a really nice one because I think it's about, what, 5 foot? Yep, 5 foot sturdy stakes, but it also comes in the jumbo form, so you won't even be able to see all of this on the screen. This is huge. I think these are 7-foot stakes. Let me just check and make sure that's correct. 75-inch, so nice and tall, so about 6.5 feet tall. Really, really nice, bigger, thicker stake, so a little bit more support. These work well in containers as well as in like those earth boxes, raised beds. It adds that height, it adds that look to it, so it adds a little bit of, you know, that height element that I mentioned earlier. You can also use, you know, when we're talking about kind of adding the look to the garden, you can just go get an obelisk, you know, something like this, which will just add a nice look, even if you don't grow anything on it. Just as almost just an architectural piece, as I mentioned earlier. This one's got that little, spinning on the top, so it's really kind of cool. But you can get lots and lots of different types of obelisks. I like to collect them over the years and put them in the center of all of my beds. It really adds a nice look to it. Let's see, what else I was going to talk about when it came, to staking, this is my other go-to, is the stretch tie. So stretch tie, I know in that one image that I showed you, somebody was using a piece of twine. Twine's okay, but if you tie it too tight, that plant is going to expand. It's going to get bigger over the year. So that the trunk of your tomato is going to get bigger and bigger throughout the season. And if you tie something that's going to not expand with the plant, then it can actually hurt the plant over time. And so this is a stretch tie, and basically it's a tape, and you just unravel it, and you just break off a piece. You can cut it, or you can just break it off. I just usually have it in my pocket, and I snap off a piece. You can tie it around, and if you tie it fairly tight, it's okay, because it's a tape. It's going to stretch. So it's a stretchy tape. It's really cool. It's pretty inexpensive, $7.99, and it's 150 feet. I think I still probably have, I think I finally bought my second roll, but it lasts a long time. I use it to tie up everything because I know it's going to be safe for my plants. And a lot of times, you might just buy some stakes. You might just buy some stakes to build your own structure, or to just put it right down by the center of the tomato plant, and then just stake your center leader of your tomato to it. That's a very, very good way of doing it as well. If you've got deer or rabbit issues, you might be looking at fencing and those types of things. So lots and lots of different things to do to support them. But I think that covered the one thing that I missed, that I didn't talk about, because there's 100 different things I can talk about when it comes to vegetable gardening. But I think I covered the basics, so I hope everybody enjoyed this. Let me just check and see if there's any questions that we had before I finish up. Let's see. Sherry said, my 2020 kale grew all last year in the hot summer. I was shocked. It died early 2022 because it froze. Wow, that is amazing. So that's really cool. I mean, and yes, a lot of these plants, like lettuce and kales, can make it through the summer season. Typically what happens is they go into a blooming period, and so when they start to bloom, they don't produce the leaves. I think it's an urban myth somewhat that when a plant blooms, like let's say like a basil or something like that, or even a cabbage or kale, that the leaves don't taste as good. But what I have found is that when they start producing flowers to seed, you typically don't see as many leaves produced, and that's what you're growing it for, is the leaves. So that's really cool to hear. Let's see, I think I answered all of those questions before, so let's see, we just had another one. Warren said, what about marigolds in the veggie garden? Do they work? Yes, marigolds definitely work. Marigolds will help keep some of the insects out. They add a little bit of color, a little bit of special color. They'll attract pollinators into the yard, into the vegetable garden. I mean, we didn't talk about pollinators. Again, there's a million things we could talk about. We need our bees and our butterflies to be attracted to our vegetable garden. So they're naturally going to be attracted to the flowers anyways, but having some marigolds in the area definitely will help. It attracts those pollinators, and it also has natural smells and oils in them that ward off some of those bad insects like squash bugs, and any of those other crawling insects that happen to come nearby. So Warren, yes, marigolds are a great option. And there's a lot of different tips and tricks that you can use that work. The owls, the rotating head owls, the scare tape to scare off the birds and any kind of other animal that might be caught by the flashing light of like a tin plate. You might have been driving by a small vegetable garden out in the country and seeing like plastic plates or cups or silver pieces flashing and blowing in the wind. That's to scare off. It's kind of like the scarecrow effect, to scare off some of those birds and squirrels and other animals that might be trying to come in and steal from our vegetable garden. So hopefully all those tips help. There's hundreds and hundreds of other things that we could do. What I really wanted to do was arm you with the basics. I think I've done that. Those are the most important things that you need to know to get out and get your vegetable garden started and be successful this year. Go for it. Have fun with it. It's a lot of fun. Learn from it. Talk to your neighbors. Get some experience from people that have grown locally with you. Friends, family, neighbors. They know. And of course, come and check us out here at McDonald Garden Center because we've been here for 75 years. And we definitely have a lot of information that we can give you on how to grow one of the best vegetable gardens. So we hope to see you here at the Garden Center, and we hope that you have fun growing your new vegetable garden if you're new, or hopefully you learned something to encourage you to continue to grow your vegetable garden for years and years and years. Hope you all enjoy this. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you next time.